Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Can My Child Play Conversations. Tonight, our guest is Dr. Stephen Horwitz from TeamSafeSports. I want to talk about a variety of things this evening, but our main goal is player safety. The reason for, or the title of our book is Can My Child Play? And one of the main things that we want to focus on and educate and bring awareness and prevention to is student safety. From beyond the questions of most parents today usually ask the question of, can my child play and why isn't my child playing? However, there's a whole host of or laundry list of questions that should be asked prior to you making the decision of whether your child should play with the program or not. My guest host or my co-host today is Tonya Wilson. Say hi, Tonya.
Hello.
Yep. And our guest this evening is Dr. Stephen Horwitz. So, Dr. Horwitz, you and I mentioned you in my book. You and I talk frequently about player safety. You really inspired me to really take more of a charge in regards to student safety or player safety across the nation. You brought a lot of things to my eyes. Your organization is called TeamSafeSports, where you provide realistic or real-time information to keep our student athletes safe at all levels of competition. However, at the youth level of competition, with the basic things that we need to know. So please, thank you for joining us and welcome. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do, Dr. Horwitz.
Thanks for having me. My background is as a DC, a doctor of chiropractic. I used to practice in Maryland for 25 years. And in the state of Maryland, all public high school coaches have to take a course called Care and Prevention of Athletic Injuries. That's a requirement in the state. And from the time I moved to Maryland in 1988, 1989, I started to teach as part of that class. And then the last 9 years I was in Maryland, I was the co-chair of that class. So it was a class where it, just like the title said, Care and Prevention of Athletic Injuries. We're not trying to make coaches athletic trainers. But at the time, there were no athletic trainers in the public schools in Maryland. Now it's a little bit better, not a lot better, a little bit better. It very much differs across the state. We can get into that, across the country rather. We can get into that, but at least it gave the coaches a little bit of background about what to do in the case of an emergency. And I can tell you from teaching it for all those years that the coaches before the class, they were not prepared. Now, remember, this is in high school. And when you mention, youth sports, the way I define youth sports is below the level of high school, meaning below in age. So the kids 5, 6, 7, when they start some type of sport, it doesn't have to be football. It could be soccer, it could be volleyball, whatever it is, up until 13, 14, 7th, 8th grade, depending on the state, possibly even 9th grade, junior high school, pre-high school age. Your kids are maybe they play in middle school. I'm in Texas now for the last 8 years. So obviously, everything's bigger in Texas. We have a pretty strong football around here. And even middle school football is pretty big time. As a matter of fact, my son's middle school field and stadium is bigger than any high school stadium in Maryland. I mean, it's insane, the size of these things. Yet even at the middle school level, what did I do? And I want to make a public thank you to you. I asked the coaches there, do you have an ice tub? This was about 2 weeks before the first practice started, and they did not. So here, even in Texas, I had to ask, it's 2020 for crying out loud. And I'm the first person that asked about having an ice tub at a middle school practice. And oh, by the way, they have athletic trainers at the games, but they don't have them at the practices. So this is, you asked me about me, this is my frustration, all those years of being in Maryland and seeing the lack of preparedness, and then moving to Texas, where I frankly thought it would be a whole lot better. And at the youth level, I can assure you parents, it's not any better. And across the country, it's really, really bad. Think about going to a pool and sending your kid to a pool without a lifeguard. That's the way it is.
Yep. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Especially right now, we're dealing with kind of like a two-headed monster. We're dealing with COVID right now, and also with student athletes coming back into sports at all levels of competition. And really, the main thing is I'd rather cut to the kind of meat and potatoes, and I want to, we talk very candidly, and we've literally lost 9 kids this summer already. And a lot of times, I mean, we know, even though the potential for what the cause of death was, however, we can read between the lines, and, you know, we know what the symptoms look like of heat-related injuries and things like that. But, you know, the Jordan McNair Foundation, that's what we focus on. However, with Team Safe Sports, you focus on all player injuries. So what's your thoughts, and what injuries do you consistently see at the youth level? Because one of the things that we want to emphasize to parents, coaches, student athletes, especially parents, especially at the age that you focus on, it's not a matter of when it's going to happen. It's not a matter of what's going to happen. It's a matter of when it's going to happen. And
Yes.
Sure as the sun shines and we wake up every day, I mean, literally the potential for a sports injury is almost certain. So what would you like to say about that? Because I know you cover everything.
Well, as soon as practices started, you know, in the last couple of weeks, it's just been, I keep emailing you, right?
Yeah.
Boom, it happened again. You know, that's my word. Again. It just keeps happening again. So what are the kind of big three? You know, there's the heat injuries, and I would say at least 6 out of the 9, probably 7, maybe even 8 out of the 9 this year are heat related. Then we have sudden cardiac arrest, where there might be a heart issue. Was that caught in the pre-participation exam, which we can get into a little bit? So there's sudden cardiac arrest we have to be prepared for. So what's the preparedness there? I mean, let's not make things complicated because they don't have to be. Are the coaches trained in CPR? And do you have an AED? So CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, AED, automated external defibrillator. Do you have one of those devices where you slap the pads on and you can shock the athlete? Or it might be a coach or an official, or a parent or a grandparent. And can you get them back with the AED? Because the likelihood of survival with an AED is much, much greater than certainly just CPR, which is much, much greater than doing nothing. And then the third thing is the head trauma. So those are the big ones, but, you know, we also have things like EpiPens. So, you know, here in Texas, we have fire ants, right? They're a big problem. Is your child allergic to a fire ant bite, a bee sting, a peanut allergy? You know, what is that, an EpiPen? You know, it's that thing you shove in your thigh. Does the organization even know that your child needs one? And have you as a parent thought about it? Well, if your kid's not in college, if they're 8 years old, maybe we want to think about, can Johnny administer it himself, or can Mary administer it herself? Or maybe it's better for coach to be able to do it. And oh, by the way, organization, do you have this documented? Because what we want to do in all this is create a safety hub. We don't want to create contentiousness. So the way you prevent contentiousness is with preparedness, in my book. If you're prepared and you say, wow, okay, my kid needs an EpiPen and he or she's allergic to bee stings and it's the summertime. So anywhere in the United States, there's a decent likelihood that bees are out. It's the summertime. So now I'm going to say my child's 8. Yeah, maybe Coach Bill, Coach Mary should have that EpiPen. And maybe organization should have it documented that I, Dad Steve, gave you, Coach Marty, gave you, League Administrator Patrice, permission for you guys to administer that EpiPen to my son or daughter. Okay. So in just one shot, you remove all the contentiousness, number one. You've really prepared yourself because now the coach has the EpiPen for your child. You've instructed the coach, these are the symptoms. Is it that my child's airway closes? Or is it that my child, gets hives? Which is it? What's their common presenting symptom? And the coach should know that. And then if they do, if it's, asthma and you need an inhaler or you need the EpiPen, you know what to do, you know how to do it, problem solved. Because with the EpiPen, 100%, they're going to survive. Yep. Without the EpiPen, not so much, not so good. So we have things like EpiPens and asthma inhalers. We have things, we're concerned about COVID and washing hands and keeping these things clean. Well, what about those infections called MRSA? Methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. That's a tongue twister. But, they spread really bad and you can die from that. So why aren't we keeping things clean way pre-COVID we should have been focused on, just simply washing your hands before and after practice. So simple, right? Not exchanging uniforms, those kind of things, not exchanging towels, all things we should have been doing pre this environment we're in now. But hopefully that will be one silver lining of all the stuff that's going on. So, I have this huge list of things. What do you do in the case of a fracture? You're going to sit there and try to move the bone in place, or you're just going to hold the child right there and wait for 911. So even with a 911 call, do you know what to do? And let me tell you something that I learned that's very interesting. And, I'm going to be strong here, and I'm going to say shame on Maryland compared to Texas. Why? Because in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, where I am now, every ambulance has 2 paramedics. Okay, paramedics, not EMTs, and no, EMTs are about 150 hours of training, but paramedic is 6 months of school. They really know what they're doing, and they're more prepared. They're able to do more things with IVs, et cetera, that EMTs are not able to do. Mm-hmm. Whereas back in 2013, I can't comment for now, but back in 2013 in Montgomery County, Maryland, there were about 160 ambulances. Only 40 had 1 paramedic. Mm-hmm. And when I used to go teach CPR to all the high schools, my instructor trainer and the guy that I actually set up to teach CPR, he was one of the head paramedics in the county. And he said, Steve, we basically have 120 fancy taxi services and only 40 ambulances where they can really do the right thing. Got it. So think about that. Now, another thing that you should think about in your locale, so you need to find out about that. Are the 911 operators trained to walk you through CPR? Things that you'd think, well, come on, I'm calling 911. Of course they're trained to do that. Well, I will tell you that's potentially the wrong answer. It is not consistent throughout the United States, the 911 operator training. So you have to find out in your state and in your county, is the 911 call center trained to walk you through a simple emergency? In many places, it's not. I have to repeat that. It's not. So if you're in a major city, you may not be prepared because there's just not enough funds to fund these kind of things. Or you could be in, Southwest Texas, way out nowhere, and you don't have the services because they're just simply not there. Right. So you really have to ask these questions.
Now, let me ask you a question, because you gave us a mouthful of some great information. However, so let's get back to when you mentioned the fire ants in Texas, or these are basic things that you mentioned, EpiPen, who may have sickle cell. And one of the main things, and Tonya, please, jump in with me. Jordan was a lifelong athlete, so I'll let Tonya speak from a parent's perspective. Beyond a physical that every student athlete has to get prior to them participating in any type of sports, you have to get a physical. Am I right, Tonya? Right. Now, beyond that, what other information medically was shared to a coach or anything? Because it's kind of like, oh, okay, the kid's healthy, they passed the physical, but all of these things that you just mentioned, is a child asthmatic? Are they allergic to anything? I mean, all these different things that the average coach has no clue about, because the buck stops right there when they get the okay to play. Like, okay, he's healthy or she's healthy to play, and that's pretty much it. Now, with Tonya, was there any other information that was shared to a coach? Because clearly, I don't remember any.
No, other than he was clear to play.
And that's it.
He's clear to play.
Right.
They don't ask, what type of, is he on any medications? Yep. They don't ask asthma, they don't, nothing. Just whatever they do in the physical. If he cleared, height, weight, everything, he's okay, clear to play.
Yep. And that's the reality of what we're dealing with. I don't think there's any coach currently in America right now that probably knows, unless they have a TeamSafe app that they're using, right, where they have real-time medical information on a player athlete or a player or student athlete, where they can realistically say, oh, okay, you know what, we can't run Ahmad, or we can't run John because John has sickle cell. You know, we have to give him breaks in between. Who does that? And again, I understand and I appreciate what Team Safe does, because you give all of these things in real time. And parents that are listening, you should never allow your child to go anywhere where there isn't, as Dr. Horwitz just said, an emergency action plan. There are way more questions, or guess what? Can my child play should be the least of your questions. Or why isn't my child playing should be the least of your questions. Because at the end of the day, your child playing, guess what, is not going to keep he or she safe. So these are the things that clearly, at the end of the day, that you need to, the toolbox of information that we need to educate ourselves and arm ourselves with to ask these questions when the time comes. You mentioned main things. You mentioned three major things. You mentioned three major things. You left out one thing, but you mentioned an AED machine, right? You had mentioned emergency action plans. You had mentioned a athletic trainer, not only during the game, but at practice, because a lot of injuries aren't happening during the game. A lot of the injuries are happening on practice time. However, the one thing you didn't mention was a cold water tub. So, you know, I know you can't catch it all, but again, I know
no,
exactly.
That's what I said. That's why I started that way,
right.
You know, to thank you for providing the tub to my son's school.
For sure.
You know, so how can, it's Texas, for crying out loud.
Sure, of course.
You know, I mean, I was born in Brooklyn. I kind of want to hit people about this. It's Texas. It's really hot. Parents, how can you possibly allow your kid? My son plays on a turf field. I just told you that his middle school is nicer than any high school that I ever saw in Maryland. So you're on a turf field. Did you know that it can be 30 to 50 degrees hotter on a turf field than on grass? Plus, it's the 100+ degree Texas heat, and you don't have an ice tub? You can hear it in my voice. I want to scream. I just want to scream. How can that possibly be okay to do that? And how much was the ice tub? Under $100. $
100. $89 to $99, right?
$89.99.
Yep.
That's how much the tub was. Oh my gosh.
Yep.
And you know, I'd also like to mention, and Tonya, for you, the physicals. So there's something called the American Academy of Pediatrics, and they have a sports medicine group that's part of the American Academy of Pediatrics. And they're charged with updating their guidelines on the youth sports physicals for the pre-participation. Now, every state, you know, plus the District of Columbia, so there's 51 youth state, I'll call them, associations for high school and middle school sports. Less than half use the most updated, which is 2019, the most recent youth sports physical form. Less than half. Many use a form that's 10 years old. And did you know that even 10 years ago, there were over 50 questions on that form? And Tonya, everything that you mentioned is on that form. But are they strict about guiding the parents through that form? No. Are the physicians that do the physicals working with the parents and actually looking at the form and asking you, mom and dad, about the answers that you gave? Because I've never met a parent, not one parent. I say, did you know that your youth sports physical, the history section, has over 50 questions? Have you filled out a form that asks you over 50 questions for your child? Not one parent in 20, almost 30 years of doing this, not one parent has said, a form with 50 questions, 50? And like, that would take me 2 hours to fill out. Yeah, you know, and you really ought to sit down and go through them one by one, because all the stuff you need to know is there. But the physician doesn't guide you. They don't ask you. They do what you said, Tonya. They just go, yep, kid's ready to go. Well, maybe not if you actually read the form. And as you know, the type of exam that's done, most of the time it's quite cursory. Most of the time it's just a really quick whip through it. Like you said, height, weight, boom, you're good to go.
Yep. Yep.
Parents, that's inexcusable. That's inexcusable. If that's what your pediatrician, you know, I'm blessed. Our son's pediatrician played D1 football at Miami. He's got 3 kids in youth sports. Man, does he know his stuff. and he doesn't screw around with the sports physicals. He does the whole shebang.
Right. And thank you for that, because I think that that's essential to let parents know that, literally we have to ask questions all around the board. But, you kind of gave me an idea. And Patrice, my mind's thinking over here. Now, would it make sense for us to partner with a doctor that is actually doing the sports physicals? And that way we can give our parents, even if it's not that 50 question questionnaire.
Required.
Right.
That's required by the UIL in Texas, and most states actually require some version of this American Academy of Pediatric form. It could be outdated, but even an outdated one, it's still required. But I'm going to put the onus a lot on the doctors here. They're not reviewing it with the parents, because parents. How can I expect the parent to know this stuff?
Yep.
This is how I was educated. Now, here in Texas, I, as a chiropractor, I'm permitted to do these sports physicals. So I don't do a lot of them because I'm semi-retired from that. But, when it came to my son, you better believe we did the whole full once over, and I know what's going on.
Right.
But it's inexcusable that the doctor doesn't educate the patient. And what I don't like about the medical world is a lot of time it's thrown back on the parent and on the kid, and that's, to me, inexcusable. The onus is on the
medical professional,
doctor, the medical professional, and the UIL here in Texas and the state, youth sports governing bodies to educate on that, and not just throw some document on a website and expect a parent to search for it. That's not okay either.
Yeah. I think that this is a time where, clearly, I think this is a time clearly where we've lost 9 kids this summer alone. 9 high schoolers this summer alone. And I think that this is an eyes wide open conversation right now. When we had Laurie Giordano on from Zach Martin Memorial Foundation last week, we just kind of emphasize these things because, one of the things, and I was actually talking with 2 coaches today. I was playing golf with 2 guys, and I was just kind of, I didn't want to literally kind of attack them with my questions, but I just was kind of casually asking questions like, well, do you know who has, sickle cell or asthma? They were like, no, we don't. And even last year in Baltimore City, we got the Jordan McNair Youth Safety Protection Act passed. And again, what does that look like? That says that any coach that wants to start a youth athletic program, they have to get trainings through Parks and Recreations every year or get certified. Is it every year, Tonya?
Every year.
Right, but you can't even start a team beyond unless you get these trainings, and the trainings in an AED machine, CPR, how to use a cold water tub, and in regards to prevention or and preparedness for any type of prevention for these type of things. And when I spoke with these 2 gentlemen today, basically they were saying, in the state of Georgia, all you got to have is a desire just to teach kids to coach kids. And a lot of states are like that, where coaches don't have the training. And guess what? This is somebody whose son may play or their daughter may play, and they just have a genuine interest in young people to want to coach them. However, they have no clue in regards to, in the event that something happened, what type of preparedness do we have? One of the guys I was speaking with today, he had an idea because one of his previous players had passed. He had a heart condition and just kind of, fell down one day and passed. I think he was 13 years old. And his family started a foundation in regards to player safety, where they donated portable AED machines. And it's that's what they donate them to various programs. And guess what? As long as it's a mobile, and they were basically saying that like everywhere they play, nobody has one. Nobody has an AED machine. And just his story about, luckily this guy carried a wet bulb globe thermometer, and he was basically saying like, wait a minute, it's too hot out here. We're on turf. And these are things that parents, we need to know, because guess what? Turf is made of plastic and rubber. What does heat do when the sun's beaming down on it? It heats up. So it's going to be maybe 20 to 30 degrees hotter. And a lot of coaches were upset because guess what? He was basically the smart one in the organization to say, wait a minute, these kids can't play until the temperature cools down, or they got to take their pads off while they're playing, or their helmets off while they're walking through drills as opposed to running through drills. And I just think that we need more people with that, and we need to educate everybody, because guess what? At the end of the day, there's no feeling in the world that can explain the feeling of losing a child. And I guarantee you, nobody wants to feel that. And when you think about, here we are giving the information to keep your child safe, I'd rather, like I always say, I'd rather a parent run on a field 100 times to check on their child, as opposed to let something bad happen or tragic happen to them that could have been prevented.
Mr. Marty, may I just interrupt one brief moment? We have a few persons on, so I just want to tell everyone, if they have a question, they can go to the Q&A and ask a question, and we'll pose it to our panelists.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Good, Steve. You got it.
You know, you mentioned sickle cell trait a couple of times. So just a little education about sickle cell trait. So it wasn't until the early 2000s that all states had a mandate where on at-birth testing, so when your child is born, sickle cell trait was tested for. So that was as of the early 2000s, 3, 4, 5. However, here's the rub. It's not necessarily, every time I say this, I can't even believe I'm saying it. It's not necessarily reported to the parents. Let me repeat that. They test for it, but the results are not necessarily reported to the parents. It's unbelievable. So you have to ask about it. So basically, it's 2020, so all kids that play, they're pretty much old enough now where you as a parent could know, but you would have to go back to your child's birth records and find that out. Legally, you're 100%, don't let anybody tell you otherwise. You're 100% allowed to get that information, but you'd obviously have to have the hospital at which your child was born and be able to get that information. And then that information needs to be reported. And I'll tell you why, because what do you think about with sickle cell trait? Well, with sickle cell trait, the main issue is Jordan McNair Foundation, the heat, right? Also altitude a little bit, but in most of the country, unless you're in the high altitude in Colorado or New Mexico, we're not really too worried about altitude. But everywhere else with the heat, we need to know about sickle cell trait, not because the kid can't compete, it's because they possibly, and I do say possibly, because it is only possibly, they could possibly have an issue. So the parent needs to be educated by the physician to say, hey, if your kid is going to get physically really active, they need a longer time to ramp up. And you have to keep a little closer eye on your child. Doesn't mean they can't. It doesn't mean they can't even put the pedal to the metal. It just means keep an eye on them, let them have a gradual ramp up in terms of physical activity, let them have a more gradual ramp up in terms of getting used to the heat. That's all it is. You have the ice tub, we got it covered. Put the pedal to the metal, let your kid play, because now you're actually prepared. But the coaches need to know. And we think of it in the African-American community, but I will tell you a short story where it happened in North Carolina. It happened to a high school football program where the athletic director / football coach never had a problem, beat the chest for 35 years. Well, guess what? Year 36, 14-year-old dead, first day of practice. Nobody knew he had sickle cell trait, and he was white. I just don't know what to say. Like, how could that possibly have been allowed to happen? So no ice tub, number one, and no data for anybody to have to know about it. And it just I can tell you, it's for everything that I have on my best practices sheet, there's a child's name or names that go along with that. And that's the sad thing. Why do we have the Jordan McNair Foundation? Why is every concussion law named after a kid? Why is every sudden cardiac arrest foundation and law named after a kid? Let that sink in a little bit. Yeah. All of these things are named after a child, a human being that died that didn't have to.
Yeah. Wow.
Almost every time they didn't have to.
Wow. Yeah, that's kind of that gives us goosebumps in a sense, because again, these things, you're 100% right. I never even looked at it like that before. Mike, now can we show the Team Safe facility safety checklist, please? Okay. So, Steve, I'll let you go ahead over. You can talk about some things on this. I think that we need to focus basically on the things that the takeaways that people will remember to kind of put some things into action like immediately.
Right. So, right on the top, there's facility safety. Obviously, there's all sorts of things depending on the sport that you need to check with regard to surfaces and debris and training equipment. A quick mention is, unfortunately, some of the largest lawsuits are due to soccer goals, if you can believe it. A soccer goal falling apart and hitting a kid on the head. There have been some massive lawsuits due to that. So checking equipment clearly is really important. The next thing for the coach training, there's a long list of medical issues there. Well, I have a free course that anybody can click on the link there, and you can just listen to this free class, and it goes over everything, CPR and first aid, concussions, heat injuries, sudden cardiac arrest, the anaphylaxis for the EpiPen, asthma, seizures, what to do, bleeding, what to do, broken bones, spine injuries, diabetes, the horrible problem called rhabdomyolysis. Well, that's a muscle wasting disorder that can lead to kidney failure and death. And guess what? In Montgomery County, way back about 10 years ago, there were 3 kids that had rhabdomyolysis because the coaches put them through a really hard push-up workout. And a bunch of the kids were freshmen and they just weren't prepared for that. And I sat in a room because they had a big kind of town meeting about this. And I sat in a room, and here I am in Montgomery County, Maryland, because I was one of the instructors for that care and prevention of athletic injuries class. And it was at the time where I happened to be the co-chair for it. And here sat all these parents, and the parents were clearly not a happy group of people. But my feeling there, so I'm gonna flip it back. Here I am in Montgomery County, where there might be more doctors and lawyers than maybe anywhere in the United States. Why weren't you there at your child's strength and conditioning practice as an observer? So I will throw it a little bit on the parents to be bold enough. I don't expect you to know the answers, but I do expect you to please be bold enough. And when I say bold, I do mean maybe nose to nose and ask questions. So there were 3 kids that were hospitalized, and one of them had 7 surgeries on his arm because of this rhabdomyolysis. Sickle cell trait, skin infections, and lightning safety. I was happy the other day. There were thunderstorms here, and the coaches did halt practice here in Texas for those thunderstorms. So kudos to the coaches, and they took care of the kids with that. Remember, I had to supply them with an ice tub, but at least they were paying attention to the lightning safety.
Correct.
The next thing is what you mentioned, that emergency action plan, kind of that pre-event safety huddle. Who's running out to the kid? I've had the 6'6", 350-pound football coach say, "Hey, Steve, I get a little queasy in the stomach if I run out, if there's a little bleeding." It's like, no problem, coach. It's football. Send another coach out to the kid. But have this conversation with your staff. Who's going to be the one, if there's not an athletic trainer around, who's going to be the one that runs out to the kid? Who's going to be the one that takes care of the rest of the team? Remember, this is youth. You want somebody who's a very strong personality, who can control any adults in the area, and can make the kids feel comfortable, like it's not some kind of horrific event. Even if things are not so good, that person has to be really good with the kids to make sure that they're taken care of so the situation doesn't get out of hand. Who's going to ride in the ambulance with the athlete? Who's going to run out to the ambulance? Like I said, everything's bigger here in Texas, but even in Montgomery County high schools and middle schools, the softball field could be way down yonder, right? And there's multiple gates that the ambulance has to get through. So I know that the driver of the ambulance is going to have the address of the school, right? But where's the softball field? Where's the football stadium? Because sometimes the football stadium may not actually, at least here in Texas, we have some huge stadiums that are actually separate from the school. So we need to make sure that there's somebody out in the parking lot waving down the ambulance to make sure that the ambulance can get in, excuse me, and making sure that all the gates are open for the ambulance to get in. And I know you have a story about that. Is if it's a college, oh my gosh, getting through a college campus can be tough. And if there's construction, oh my, it can be very, very difficult to find a location. So the speed at which the ambulance can get there will obviously make the result a lot better the faster that it is. So things like that, that emergency action plan, just deciding who's got what job is just so important. And then have that 60-second safety huddle before the event. Who's doing what? Okay, we got it covered. Yep, ice tub's good and ready. We have ice. We have a water supply. We have the AED. It's either on my person or within 60 seconds for me to run and get it. Okay, we're good. We got everything handled, right? So that goes to all the emergency equipment. If there are kids that need inhalers and EpiPens, do you have that as a staff? Do you have the parents okay to have that? Those types of things. And then the documentation part. Do you know the child's history? Because if I'm running out on the field, it would really be helpful for me to have a brief medical history like we have in the TeamSafe app of what's going on with the child. So I know their date of birth. I know their brief medical history. Do they have are they on any medications? Do they have a seizure disorder? Do they have sickle cell trait, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I'm talking about with preparedness. And then, lastly, if we get into the issue of, for instance, head injuries or really any injury, so let's say somebody had a heat event and the school was in good shape, did have an ice tub. Johnny was put in the ice tub. Everything's A-okay. Johnny goes home, has a fun dinner with his parents. Well, what about return? Is Johnny, even though everything's okay or seemingly okay, is Johnny getting checked out by a medical professional? And is that being documented before Johnny can go back, whether it's a heat event, a head event, whatever it is Johnny getting the proper medical care? And can you as an organization track that? So again, we create the safety hug. Okay, we have the doctor's return note. Everything's good. We're good. Everybody plays. And I am definitely not one of those who says, oh my gosh, I'm nervous about sports. No, I want to see the kids be able to put the pedal to the metal and play hard. But like I keep saying, it's fun to have a really fast car with a big engine in it, right? But that car has good brakes and good suspension. So where are the brakes and the suspension?
Yep, good point.
So I'll shut up now. And
no. Thank you. I mean, if we definitely have some time for questions. We have probably maybe about 18 more minutes here. So if we do have anybody that does have any questions, this is the time to ask right now. You made a lot of good points, especially with your checklist. And I think that one of the main things I remember, Tonya had talked last year when we did a lot of educating various parents, especially at our sports clinics and things like that. One of the things she was saying, because if you go to a sports practice or youth practice, basically you got the kids out there playing on the field or playing wherever in the practice area, and you have all the parents kind of huddled up over here in the corner. And, all the moms may be kind of whatever they're talking about, the latest, I don't know, TV show or whatever the case may be. And, or you see a lot of the parents are sitting in their cars and they're just kind of into their own thing in a sense. And they just so trusting of the coaches and the staff that they're around that, again, they're just not as prepared as they should be. But I remember Tonya made a very good point last year where something as basic as moms and dads, when you stop, your child en route to practice to get, that Gatorade or that water or whatever hydration that they're drinking, stop and get a bag of ice as well. And that way you can get everybody involved and bring that bag of ice to the game or practice as well. And it literally, at least the more participation that we have from everyone, guess what? We can never have too much ice or a cold water tub, or just the simple things that, again, you want to know, who's going to ride. That 60-minute huddle makes such a big difference for sports organizations. And I think that as parents, basically you should be asking, what do you have in place? Because guess what? It's not a question of what's going to happen. It's just a matter of when it's going to happen. Because all of these 9 kids that literally have died this summer, guess what? That's a prime example. And hopefully nobody will have to continue. We won't continue to experience these tragedies, but I guarantee you there was one common denominator in all 9 cases. There was one common denominator that somebody didn't do something that something wasn't expressed, somebody didn't know something, but basically all of this information. Like you said, how can you run out on the field and you don't know what a child's medical background is? Because like you just said, yeah, Johnny might have went home and ate dinner with his family, but guess what? Is he really ready to play tomorrow? You know, is he still exhibiting symptoms from something that happened yesterday? And I just think that we think that, you know, I'm confident that we think that, you know, guess what? The powers that be, or these people that are playing, or that are supervising our children at this level of competition, we think they're not doctors. They're just coaches that may have a desire. And guess what? If you're not asking the right questions, as I always say every week or every time we do one of these in my book as well, that's not the organization your child should be playing with.
Yeah, you know, when our son showed an interest in football, and 2 springs ago, he started with some flag football. And in the local park, you know, it was a sports park, so it had several fields, and they had about 6 games going on at the same time. And there's no AED at the park, none. And there's no ice tub at the park. So there's, you know, I went just to see Hayden play, and, you know, with my wife. And, you know, but I say stupid Steve, but maybe it was actually smart Steve. You know, I had my igloo cooler of, you know, 6 or 8 ice bags made up. And, you know, he obviously had a thermos of water. And I had my big fanny pack of first aid stuff to bring. And guess what? Every single game I ran, every single weekend, every single weekend, I ran onto the field at least one time.
Yep.
And I'm just there as dad, not even as a volunteer sports medicine, but I can't not, as whatever the risk, especially these days with lawsuits, I can't not help the kid. If I have that skill set, then I'm going to go out and run. And every time, and the coaches were like, "Oh, get him up, get him up." I'm like, "No, whoa, slow down." You know, that's where the Brooklyn upbringing is helpful. Like, slow down, coach. No, we're not going to pick him up just yet. Let's just see what's going on first.
Sure.
And knock on wood, there wasn't anything, you know, quote unquote, super serious that happened. But, you know, I don't know until I know, right? I don't know until I get out there and can do at least a little bit of an assessment. And, you know, unfortunately, the organization that was putting on these games just didn't get it. And they never got an AED, and I could have gotten one donated, and they never got the ice tub, and you know, you would have donated it, and I just wouldn't do it.
Yep.
So he stopped playing for that organization, and we picked a new organization.
Thank you. And even now, I think that, in my opinion, is a lot of parents just don't. You know, you and I talk frequently, and you know, we always talk about, you know, we need more parent participation. We need more parent participation, right. And we want. If parents, you know, clearly this is for you all, that we want everyone to be, we don't want you to be in a reactionary, come from a reactionary place. You know, we're promoting prevention. That's our main goal, awareness, education, and prevention. And Dr. Horwitz is one of our partners in this advocacy, in our advocacy efforts, that we want to educate you before it gets to a situation where there's no turning back. And then you're wondering, like, what did I miss? Tonya and I had that conversation because guess what? We were those same parents that just assumed that, guess what? We never questioned coaches, and we just assumed that every program Jordan ever played for, you know, they knew what they were doing. And nobody wants to be on the other side of what questions didn't we ask? What did we miss? What we should have asked. And again, in my book, on our website, Dr. Horwitz website, teamsafe.org, the Zach Martin Memorial Foundation. These are questions that every parent should be reading. Go to our website. I have videos from Dr. Horwitz, Team Safe, the Zach Martin Memorial Foundation on how to use a cold water tub. I showed your video to every student athlete everywhere I go to speak. I show that 15-minute video to educate, because there's enough education in that 15 minutes that will make you look at this whole entire thing differently. But I think now, from us literally on an email that we just sent out, we literally lost 9 kids in one summer. We lost 6 kids in the last month. Was it 6 or 7 kids in the last month?
Yeah, now I'm unfortunately looking at the list, and yeah, from August 11th August 11th, 13th, 16th, 25th, 26th, 9/6, and 9/9.
And who's to say that everybody, and one of the things I want, all parents I like to speak to, this isn't just a football injury. This is a student athlete injury. We had soccer players on that list. Yep. We had football players, cross country. I mean, again, we have to be smart and we have to educate, because again, our prayers and our hugs emotionally and our thoughts go out to these 9 families that literally have lost their children, their gifts from God as a result of maybe, guess what, somebody wasn't as prepared as they should have been. And clearly you don't want to hear excuses when it's your child. Believe me, Tonya and I know that wholeheartedly. We don't want to hear that, guess what, the ambulance came to one field and it took them another 15 to 20 minutes to figure out where the child was even injured at. So again, these are things that we want to know. And these are things that clearly we need to get more parents involved in to help us make a difference, to spread the word to one more other parent or 2 other parents. Because see, this is where we are at. We donated 200 plus cold water tubs last year. And the thing was, we really didn't have the demands that we have this year. Because guess what? If we donate a cold water tub, you got it. It's just there. And, we know what it's for. The athletic trainer know what it's there for. But if a parent doesn't know what it's there for, what's the benefit of it? They don't see the value in a cold water tub if they aren't educated on it. They don't see the value in an AED machine until, guess what, that possible AED machine saves their life, save their child's life. So I think that, again, we need to emphasize education. Everybody that's on, please tell somebody. Everybody that listens, please tell somebody, because this is something that needs to be heard. So Dr. Horwitz, on our way out, what are your final thoughts? And I think, again, the takeaways should be, realistically, I mean, can you give us 3 to 4 things that, 3 to 4 questions that somebody should be asking, and how we can get in touch with you, and how, we can introduce, every parent should be able to introduce the TeamSafe app to their sports organizations. How can we get in touch with you to make that happen?
My website is TeamSafeSports.com. And all social media everything is Team Safe Sports. So Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and my email is really easy. It's just Dr. Steve, DRSTEVE at TeamSafeSports.com. So just TeamSafeSports.com. Follow us on the social media. I get the Google alerts about all these kids with all these issues, and I've been doing this since, getting the Google alerts since 2016. But again, remember, I was in Montgomery County, since 1989, doing these talks to coaches and schools, and just being out on the field at countless numbers of athletic events, from youth sports all the way up to the Olympic Games. I mean, and I even traveled with USA Track and Field. I traveled with them to Cuba, and it was for the US Pan Am Track and Field Juniors. So it was our best 15 to 19-year-olds. And I almost got thrown in jail in Cuba. Why? Because a kid hurt, one of our pole vaulters hurt herself, and I wasn't supposed to cross the track to go to the infield, but she hurt herself, so I ran across the track to see what was going on. And, I was in Cuba. I could have been there for a while. And they were barking at me, and, again, the Brooklyn upbringing came in handy. I'm like, this is my kid. Yeah, well, not my child, but a U.S. kid.
Of course.
You can go do whatever, but I'm going to make sure that she's okay. And that's what you have to do for your kid. Be that parent. Please be that parent. Please go nose to nose with the coach. Because if that coach doesn't care enough to get that ice tub, for sure, 100%, if that coach didn't get the ice tub, Hayden wasn't going to play. There's no way. But thankfully, he was very thankful for it. So that was good. And I think he realized, wow, we at least got one parent that's going to kind of make sure I do all the right things. Mm-hmm. So please be that parent, because you'll never regret that. You'll just never regret asking, what kind of training do the coaches have? The equipment that you need, an AED and an ice tub. That's really it. You don't need some kind of wilderness first aid kit, because most of us are not in the wilderness, right? We don't need anything really fancy. We need an AED, we need an ice tub, we need good communication, we need a medical history, we need a good pre-participation physical. So when you go to the doctor, you know how most doctors are. They've got one foot out of the room at the time they step into the room. So just grab that white lab coat, pull them back in, say, Doc, take a seat. I got some questions for you. Slow down here. I want to go over this physical because I didn't understand a whole bunch of things.
Yep.
That's what they're there for.
Yep. And also what we're doing is we'll have your the questionnaire or the checklist that you have. We'll post that on the Jordan McNair Foundation website.
Thank you.
And that'll go under parents and coaches, Mike. Yeah, that'll go under that tab. And again, these are things that everything Dr. Horwitz is saying, clearly we have it in Can My Child Play? Purchase a copy today. We have all of his contact information and a lot of the questions that we should be asking of our coaches. And I think that parents, please, let's get away from that analogy of parents, and coaches, coach. Let's get away from that, because at the end of the day, you're the one that'll help a coach keep your young child or your student athlete safe. And that's what our main goal is, to really promote awareness, education, and prevention of heat-related injuries and just player safety. This isn't a football injury. This is a student athlete injury, and we do not want the injury, this tragic type or any type of injury, to happen to your child. And this is why we're here doing what we're doing. So Dr. Horwitz, thank you for joining us once again. I'm just glad that we had an opportunity to get this information out there, because this definitely needs to be heard. And even though personally we don't hear about these young people or these 8 or 9 student athletes that have passed the summer, especially if it's not in our geographical area or it's not a family member or a family member of a friend or something like that. But again, they still happen. And again, Tonya and I were stunned at the numbers of student athletes that had passed from the year 2000 in the NCAA. It was literally 30 kids prior to Jordan. Jordan was literally the 31st kid. Brayton Bradford was the 32nd kid. 2019, we didn't lose anyone. However, we still have COVID this year. We still have to be extra safe. So once again, I'd like to send our prayers and our thoughts out to the young people that have passed this year or this summer, unfortunately, from preventable injuries. But again, I always want to name them on the show. But again, it's a sad thing to hear every time Dr. Horwitz sends us oh no, not again. And you read somebody else's family that has to go through that. And this heartache is just a heartache that's just really, really deep. And we wish this one on no one. So our prayers go out to the family of Shane Thomas, Dylan Durrell, Hunter Midkiff, Jacob Kaishan Cooper, Matthew Mangine, Rue McNeil, Isaiah Turner, Amari President, and as of yesterday, a young man passed by the name of Jermaine Stevens. So our prayers and our thoughts go to their families, and let's please keep their families in prayer during these difficult times. Thank you for joining us. Our next show will be athletic trainers and the significance of an athletic trainer in your child's sports program and what they do. Thank you. We'll see you Thursday, the last Thursday of the month. Have a good evening.